Welcome to the Online Great Books podcast, brought to you by OnlineGreatBooks.com, where we talk about the good life, the great books, great conversation, and great ideas. I'm Scott Hambrick.
And I'm Karl Shute.
Today on the Online Great Books podcast, an essay on the restoration of property by Hilaire Belloc.
You know, I have never known how to pronounce his name.
Don't correct me, because I'm just going to stick with the way I did it just then.
Belloc. It's also the name of the bad guy from Indiana Jones' first movie.
People keep telling me I need to read this. You know, people. People told me I needed to read some Wendell Berry. They were right. People have been telling me I need to read this. I think they were right. So I'm going to keep listening to these people. I'm not going to tell you who they are. It's not Instagram. It's not tweeters. No.
No, he's I don't know too much of his life story. I've read a few of his things. I've liked some of his histories. My favorite book of his, I actually want to read a little bit of it to you. May I read a poem?
I would love that.
Okay, so the most famous work is a work that he wrote for children. It's called Cautionary Tales. And I recommend, if you have children, you go get this book. The version that I have is illustrated by Edward Gorey, he's a very strange person. So this first one is entitled Jim, who ran away from his nurse and was eaten by a lion. There was a boy whose name was Jim. His friends were very good to him. They gave him tea and cakes and jam and slices of delicious ham and chocolate with pink inside and little tricycles to ride, and read him stories through and through, and even took him to the zoo. But there it was, the dreadful fate befell him, which I now relate. You know, at least you ought to know, for I have often told you so, that children never are allowed to leave their nurses in a crowd. Now this was Jim's especial foible. He ran away when he was able. I love that rhyme. And on this inauspicious day he slipped his hand and ran away. He hadn't gone a yard when bang, with open jaws, a lion sprang, and hungrily began to eat the boy, beginning at his feet. Now just imagine how it feels when first your toes and then your heels, and then by gradual degrees your shins and ankles, calves and knees are slowly eaten bit by bit. No wonder Jim detested it. No wonder that he shouted, "Hi!" The honest keeper heard his cry. Though very fat, he almost ran to help the little gentleman. "Ponto," he ordered as he came, for Ponto was the lion's name. "Ponto," he cried with angry frown. "Let go, sir, down, sir, put it down." The lion made a sudden stop. He let the dainty morsel drop and slunk reluctant to his cage, snarling with disappointed rage. But when he bent him over Jim, the honest keeper's eyes were dim. The lion having reached his head, the miserable boy was dead. When nurse informed his parents, they were more concerned than I can say. His mother, as she dried her eyes, said, "Well, it gives me no surprise he would not do as he was told." His father, who was self-controlled, bade all the children round attend to James's miserable end, and always keep a hold of nurse for fear of finding something worse.
I like it.
That's not this book, but he was a man of talent.
Do you have to be a helicopter parent if you're willing to tell the kids, if you don't do what you're told, the lion will get you, the boogeyman?
Well, the lion might get you.
Yeah, the lion might get you. There is the helicopter parent phenomenon we all have seen. But in conjunction with that, it seems like there's an extreme concern for the kid's safety and their well-being, but they also hide how dangerous things can be from the kid at the same time. Everything's fine. You have nothing to worry about. And then the parents just hover over them. I like letting them know that the world's a dangerous place. We don't want to scare anybody, but we need to let them know it's a dangerous place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it is a dangerous place. That's part of the reason for unsanitized fairy tales.
Mm-hmm.
The world is full of peril. You might make a mistake that changes your life forever. It can happen. It does happen.
Yep.
It's not Nerf world.
Is it economically dangerous, Karl?
Yes. So this is a book of economics, the one that we're going to read. I have lots of libertarian friends. I like them. I have sympathy with them. They probably wouldn't like this book.
Well, they need to put their finger on why they don't like it, and it's probably not the answer. I've read some von Misse's critique of the Distributists. He's wrong about why he doesn't like them, and we'll come to that here in a minute.
So this is an essay on distributivism, I think is what they call it.
There's no V in there. No V.
There isn't? Distributism? No. Oh, well then I'm wrong.
Yeah, they're distributists.
Which is not capitalism and it's not communism. and it's not libertarianism.
Okay, I'll buy it. What is it, Karl?
It's propertyism.
Yeah, it's the idea that property should be evenly distributed among the citizens as possible. It's kind of nice. Like, if you hear the Marx line about the people need to seize the means of production, sounds pretty good, actually. Like, the people should own the means of production. That's a good piece of rhetoric, I think. Right? Karl's making a frowny face.
Yes, but I just have a brand new copy of the Marx and Engels Reader, and I was poking through the manifesto. It starts off with, history is the history of class struggle.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's not quite true. I mean, there's class struggle, sure, but is history merely the history of class struggle?
Of course not.
But the thing about communism is you don't own anything.
Right. Belloc here, I think he wants the means of production actually distributed into the hands of the citizenry as evenly as possible. And he says over and over again that he doesn't want a mathematical perfection in this, because there can't be. But the government should be set up in such a way that it helps normal people own their homes and own their livelihood, so that they're not at economic peril of losing their wage by being fired, economic upheaval, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. So reading this, one of the takeaways for me is that property does not mean money.
Yes.
Property means property.
We had a big, long talk about that here at our house last night. Yeah, in fact, they're almost directly opposed.
So if you are cash rich and property poor, you are still dependent.
Yes.
Whereas if you are property rich and cash poor, you're still going to eat.
Yes, if the government will leave you alone. You could have 1,000-acre farm of not terribly productive land and be able to provide for your family and food and so on, but the property tax requires you to have cash to pay the property tax bill, so they don't take the property. So even though all of your material needs could be met by your property, the government could take you out of the game. So he was really worried about those kinds of things in the government, making it difficult for people to take care of themselves and have their own means of doing that.
Yeah. I want to read a little bit from the preface. I was never able to get a paper copy of this, so page numbers are going to be difficult. Some may criticize me for not discussing the social and political arguments against small ownership. Its dangers and drawbacks are considerable and certainly deserve weighing against its advantages. Okay, so he's giving the counter-argument. Property or management concentrated in few hands is used with greater knowledge and under better opportunities for large developments. A society of small owners may be over-conservative and timid, probably more ignorant than an economic oligarchy controlling its mass of wage slaves. In foreign affairs, it is less likely to judge wisely and act rapidly. And he gives a whole list of these things. And my note was, is this a feature or a bug?
Yep.
People will bring up the example of the buggy whip makers that went away when the car came along. Well, we're going to preserve the buggy whip. Are you against progress? Progress is all towards consolidation and bigger, like all of these fulfillment warehouses, which are popping up at every cloverleaf around me. Bigger's better, right? More efficient, right? Okay, more efficient, but what have you lost? So Belloc's argument is a lot about what you lose. There is a cost to consolidation. Mm-hmm. If you want to buy a book, where are you going to go to buy a book? You've got one choice, right?
Increasingly.
Two choices, maybe two choices. You can go to Barnes & Noble or you can go to Amazon. Where's your local bookstore?
Yeah, the only local bookstore here in Tulsa that's thriving, well, there are two, actually. One's a used bookstore, which is owned by a family and does very well. And the other one is one that's subsidized by a charitable foundation and carries Marxist screeds. It's called the Magic City Bookstore, and it's a POS. There you go.
I don't think we have any. We have half-price books.
Oh, yeah.
A chain used bookstore. But Barnes & Noble and Borders are gone. We used to have Crocs and Bentranos and B. Daltons and
Walden Books.
Yeah, they're all gone. So if you want to buy a physical copy of a book, you don't have a whole lot of choice.
In that preface, he lists a whole bunch of things that would be criticisms of his distributist plan. And then you just said, is it a feature or a bug? And I think the whole idea underlying what he's saying, what he's writing in this essay, and I'm reading the IHS Press edition of this. It's a paperback. It's about 85 pages. The idea underlying the whole thing is predicated on a much different notion of the good than most people carry today. So back to these libertarians, von Mises and others have had criticisms of distributists because their notion of what is good is entirely different than Belloc's. They're concerned with GDP, technological advancement. They conflate economic activity with falling infant mortality rates and all kinds of things that they claim are societal goods. But Belloc is not concerned about that. His main concern is economic freedom, at least expressed here. I know that he has some other concerns that he expresses in other places, but I think that's right. Do you buy that, Karl?
Yeah, and economic freedom means probably freedom from domination by others.
We've got so many freedoms that we care about. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of, we got a whole Bill of Rights. We got a bunch of other amendments. We have these freedoms that we care about, but we never talk about, I say never, rarely do we talk about economic freedom. And it's one of my major concerns. It always has been. Belloc's tickling my freedom bone with this.
Where is the freedom bone?
It moves around. It's a very strange thing.
Well, it's free.
Yes, that's right.
Right, so it can move around. I was just thinking, as we're sitting here, my very small stock portfolio is up.
Yep.
GDP contracted 32%. What's going on?
Well, you want to talk about that?
Not too much. But just as an example of economic well-being being measured on two different axes here. So my stocks are up. Hooray. That's great. I suppose. That's great. I know a whole bunch of people out of work. I've been following my friends who are gym owners. I have been watching them one by one drop off. Quit. Have to sell. Can't stay open because they're non-essential. But the stock market's up.
Yeah.
So are we doing well or are we not doing well?
I saw a graph on Forbes.com the other day. The top 5 stocks in 2010 and the top 5, not stocks, the 5 largest publicly traded companies in 2010 and the 5 largest companies in 2020, those lists have changed almost entirely. I think the only one that was on it in 2010 that's still on it, I think, is Microsoft. And the largest one on the list today has a capitalization larger than all 5 of them in 2010. What is going on? So I think a lot of people can see that there's some wackiness going on. The Fed has publicly said that they're going to buy stocks on the dips, right? So when demand for stocks falls, the price falls. When the price falls, the stock market goes down. Your index shows falling value on the index. The Federal Reserve Bank has said they're going to buy into the dips to create more demand so that to buoy those prices up there. Meanwhile, everybody listening here knows somebody that's a good person who works, shows up on time, and doesn't call in sick, who doesn't have work. And when they do find work, we all know that a lot of these people are going to go back to work for a considerably smaller wage. So that kind of stuff's a big problem for our friend here. He says right off the bat, he gives us some cautions. He says, when you go read this, he says, know that I'm not attempting a mechanical perfection in distribution here. He knows that not everybody is going to have 3 acres and a cow. That's what Chesterton would talk about, 3 acres and a dairy cow. He knows that not everybody's going to have the exact same property, and he doesn't even worry about that. He just wants this imaginary society here to tend towards an equal distribution of property ownership. He says there must be a favorable state of mind in society for this to happen as well. And number 3, the powers of the state must be invoked to get this to come about. And this is the thing that libertarians, that I hate libertarians for, they don't understand that if they want their libertarian utopia to come about, they will have to use the powers of the state to make that happen. So they're over there, holding onto their own bootstraps and pulling, and they don't understand how the world works, and they just, end up just having conferences and being weird and getting nowhere. So there, libertarians. And by the way, whoever you are that's mad at me, I was a bigger libertarian than you, for sure. I had a gun made of marijuana. That's how libertarian I was.
You had a what?
A gun made of marijuana.
I don't think that's true. I want to see it.
I didn't. It's a good idea, though. You could make anything out of hemp. They'll tell you.
Well, I think the motivations are good. The strategy is no good. You know?
Yeah, I agree.
I think it probably tends to overestimate the rationality of the average person. In other words, if we just leave everybody alone, then we'll get libertopia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, if you leave everybody alone, you'll get exactly what we have. You know, factions and power being agglomerated into the few, you'll get exactly what we have. So,
well, I don't know about exactly. I don't want to be that guy, but we'll get something that we don't like.
Yeah, so if you're going to have something good, you're going to have to defend it.
And you have to do something with power to get it, too. It's not going to just like sprout out of the ground like a mushroom after a rain.
Right. So the strategy might need to be different. So he actually talks about the living wage, which they had a scheme in England in 1936. I mean, that's a popular one now, the universal basic income. But he says that these sorts of things do not directly advance nor are directly connected with the idea of property. They're only connected with the idea of income. They propose to restore purchasing power to the destitute masses of society ruined by industrial capitalism. So that's not an answer, because that's just, here's some cash, but you don't own anything and you're still a slave.
Yeah. Don't even think about UBI in that way. Well, you do think about UBI that way, but think about somebody, a six-figure salaryman who doesn't have his house paid for, doesn't have his car paid for, and doesn't have 2 months' worth of living expenses in their checking account. They lose their job. That guy is in terrible, terrible position, and might, in fact, be in a worse position than someone that had nothing. Because you've got to make the car payment, you've got to make the house payment, and so on. So a guy who is a highly compensated salaryman or wage slave, I think Belloc probably invents that phrase, wage slave. He's certainly one of the first people to use it. Even if you're a highly compensated wage slave, your situation is just as precarious as the person who's receiving the dole, because you have no property. You have nothing to fall back on when the caprice of the wage master takes your money away. Is there anything debatable about that? Would von Mises or a Marxist critique that?
The Marxists would probably agree, but then would want the wrong answer.
Well, that's fine.
Or a wrong answer. You know, so when Belloc talks about capitalism here, he does not mean I grow some potatoes and I trade them to you for asparagus. That's the ordinary things that humans do. We make stuff and we trade it for other stuff, and maybe we come up with a means of exchange so we can do it more easily. That's not capitalism. That's not what he means. Capitalism is the concentration of capital in a few people's hands.
Yeah. For him, that's what he's talking about. Yeah.
Amazon, Walmart, all those companies that were able to stay open during the quarantine while everyone else had to shut down. Yeah. And thus have humongous profits. Remember we read that The War is a Racket book? And we went through the numbers of, what's his name? What's the author's name again? Smedley Butler?
General Smedley Butler.
Smedley Butler compared the balance sheets of companies before World War I and after it, and how many got really, really rich. Well, do the same thing with the quarantine. Yeah. Did they get really, really rich because they had the best product, or did they get really, really rich because they knew people and they were able to have their shop stay open? That's the kind of capitalism that he's talking about. It's oligarchy, it's plutocracy, which is one of my favorite words. Mm-hmm. Plutocracy. Pluto is the Roman god. He's not the same as Hades. He's not the god of the underworld, except sort of. He's the god of wealth, which is found in the depths of the earth.
Like a mining product?
Yeah. So a plutocracy would be a rule by the rich.
He wants to have a government actively act. He wants to have them act in opposition to those kinds of forces that he says always happen. And right at the beginning of chapter 1, he puts forth a few basic ideas that we must produce wealth. He says, man, to live, must transform his environment from a state in which it is less to a state in which it is more useful to himself. And this process is called the production of wealth. We're the only animal that needs clothes and tools to stay alive. We have to produce wealth to live. And he has no problem with that. And he says we need a certain amount of wealth to just get by. You've got to have enough clothes to stay warm in the winter, wear this furs or whatever the heck it is, and you got to have enough wealth, which might just be a handmade bow and arrow to kill animals with. But you have to have a certain amount of wealth to live. He has no problem with that. But we now have people. I just stated a case. You have to have some clothes. You have to have something to get some food with, a few tools. We have a lot of people that are very high wage earning people that have nothing more than that. They may drive an automobile and have the keys to it, and they may have a house, but they aren't their things, and their house isn't theirs. Mm-hmm. The tools that they use often aren't even theirs either. They go to the factory and use somebody else's tools, or they go to the office and use somebody else's.
I'm thinking about some of these gyms that I saw that went under from people that I know, impressive people that went out and took a risk. Well, why did they go under from being out of business for 4 months? Well, because they got to pay the rent. They got to pay the taxes. They don't own any of it. They might own the squat rack. Okay, so you don't own any of it, which means that you don't have economic freedom. A downturn and you're screwed. Because you still have to pay the taxes. You still have to pay the rent. Whereas if you had your own property, and you didn't have the property tax burden, maybe you could close up for 4 months.
Yep.
Because you didn't have many costs of maintaining your place without it bringing in money. But we have a systemic problem, if you will, of a cost for stuff that you shouldn't have to have a cost for.
I have a friend who owns some pizza restaurants, and he owns all of the buildings they're in. He typically puts them in old downtown areas in small towns. Walmart killed downtown of small middle America in the late 70s and through the 80s. There would be a little mom and pop hardware store, a little mom and pop sewing notion store, a men's clothing store, a small department store, a grocery. There would be all those things in your downtown of your 5 to 25,000 population small town. Walmart killed them all. And my friend has bought buildings in those small towns and put pizza restaurants in them. And he's paid very little for them because nobody wants them. But it works for him. And he's paid in cash for all of those over time. And I was talking to him the other day. He says, well, if they do this COVID thing again, he said, we could just shut the door for a year. He said, property tax is not much. We can just shut the utilities off and shut it down for a year. We can come back and fire the oven up and start making pizza again.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want that to happen, but he can do it. And he was, I said, well, what would your expenses look like if you were closed? He said, property tax and insurance keep the building from burning down, or to protect him in case it burned down. That's where you want to be. It's not undoable. Belloc in here says that he doesn't think that his system can actually be implemented. He doesn't think that we have the right mindset among the people, and he thinks we're kind of too far gone and people don't value what he wants them to have. So he doesn't think it could come to pass. But if you're listening to this thinking, well, how could I possibly own my house, or how could I possibly own my own business? It's possible. It just might not be possible in today's current environment.
Well, it might be a smaller house.
Right. Yeah, he says in here that the wage earner is always going to have more cash than the man who makes a living of his property. And as long as you value that income more than you do the economic freedom that the property gives you, people are always going to choose the wage earning position versus the property position. Because the guy with the property, if he's got 2 acres, or in Chesterton's example, 3 acres and a cow, he's not going to build a big house. He has to till and use as much of that 3 acres as possible to yield for food and whatever else trade he needs to have. And he needs the house to be inexpensive to maintain too, because he's got plenty of other things to do and very little cash to do it with. It's a hard way of life, but it's a free way of life.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day as I was mowing my lawn, looking out at the lawns of all my neighbors, which is all unproductive land. I have not been very good at this.
Melissa told me that.
I don't care about flowers. You know, I have a few things I planted that are doing well. I have a clematis that keeps coming back no matter how I abuse it, and some cone flowers, which are native to Illinois. And so they're basically weeds with pretty flowers on them.
Perfect.
So they'll grow. Yeah. That's part of the secret. You find out what the land wants to grow.
Right.
And then you grow it. And then it'll probably do pretty well. But all of this land is being unused. The neighbors across the way from us, diagonally across the way from us, have now, they probably because of the quarantine, they've got a big raised bed garden, and they've got some beans climbing the lattice, and they've got something on their pergola. And so they're making some use of it. And I thought, what if everybody did that? All of these small householders with useless lawns. What if you planted some stuff? You know, and then the neighborhood would have some food supply. And so when all the groceries shut down, I said, well, I got some stuff I put up from last year's harvest, you know, or maybe I'll trade with the other neighbor. And you see, that group, so Belloc talks about a sturdy peasantry. I think that's kind of what he means. Mm-hmm. Peasant sounds like a bad word, but it means somebody who's tied to the land. If you were, even in small groups, more self-sufficient, then you would care much less what they do in Springfield, which is our capital city, or Washington. And I was thinking of the Hank Williams Jr. song. Why are you laughing at me? I love that song.
Country boy can't survive.
The country boy can survive because he knows how to do stuff, and he knows how to get food. And so that poor person in that song has economic freedom because he's got a little bit of land and he knows how to make food, which is what you need. Water, I suppose we'd probably still need water, but we got a great big lake to the northeast of us, so water's pretty easy to get here. But rather than, you know, a rootless, sterile, you're just living in a place. You're not getting anything out of the place.
You have no responsibility to the place really either, but to go to work, punch that clock, and keep the wage coming. He lays out all of the advantages for large enterprise, you know, the economy of scale stuff, purchasing power that comes with that scale. Big businesses have an ease of borrowing that smaller companies or smaller entities don't have. They can sell at a loss to harm their smaller competitors for a time, drive them out of business, and then...
Which is what Walmart and Amazon did.
That's exactly right.
Still do.
All day, every day. They have less privation in saving, which is an interesting point, which I have gotten to feel it from time to time. If you make $500,000 a year, it's a lot easier to save $50,000 than if you make $100,000 a year, right? All savings results in an immediate privation. It's money that you just salt away and doesn't yield you anything that you need or desire in that moment. If you only make enough to just get by, well, you can't save anything. You know, I was on that Barbell Logic podcast for a long time. We ended up talking about personal finance a lot. And I would have people email me like, how do you get a budget? And, you know, and a lot of these people, I would actually call them on the phone and we'd talk about, you know, creating a budget. And a lot of people didn't even really have enough money to even have a budget. Like if you've only got enough to buy food, put gas in the car and pay the rent, do you really need a budget? When you get paid, you should fill the car up, write the rent check and go buy groceries. And the day you have money left over, we'll talk about a budget at that point, you know, and they're so far from saving that it's just a dream for them. So the more money you make, the more you can save. The more you can save, the more property you could accumulate. So big companies are at a big advantage that way.
But here's the thing. Saving is not good for the economy.
I don't buy that.
No, viewed from the way everybody thinks about it. The economy is measured in economic activity, which means buying stuff.
Right. If
you don't buy stuff, like I've been making my lunch, except for yesterday because we were out of lunch meat, making my lunch and taking it to the gym with me because I go to the gym twice a week. And I used to just go, when I was less sensible, I'd just pick up something on the way. That's a waste of the land fund. That's a waste of money.
Right.
So we're just going to make my own lunch. I'm having the kids do it. and save the money. But that's bad for the economy if I do that.
Well,
Because that means the McDonald's on the way doesn't get my cash. So saving, being thrifty, which used to be considered to be virtues, are not considered to be virtues, except by Dave Ramsey.
and me. Yeah.
Because it depresses economic activity, and economic activity is what we measure.
In those libertarian detractors from distributism, most of their arguments boil down to but productivity. And, if they say something about the Industrial Revolution reduced infant mortality, and arguments very similar to that. I don't even need to list them, but they all kind of boil down to that same kind of thing. But I just don't think that's true. Antibiotics were not discovered because of a giant corporation. A guy was a slob, left a petri dish uncovered while he went on vacation, came back 2 weeks later, saw it was fuzzy, was intellectually curious enough to investigate that, and bang, bang, you've got antibiotics. It wasn't because of the steam engine or whatever. It's not. They conflate economic activity with human well-being, and I don't buy it. So when I talk to my libertarian friends or even to my old libertarian self, we can't get on the same page because I just don't buy their arguments. He continues to go list. I'm going to try to go through this book fairly faithfully and then critique it some here at the end. He says, because these people have this less privation and savings, they accumulate more property, they have these economies of scale, they accumulate more property, blah, 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 blah. And by they become plutocracies, and they will necessarily corrupt the legislature. And then, because of the nature of the legal system, it costs money to have justice. And I have a friend, my friend Dallas has always told me you can have all the justice you can afford. The smallholder, their legal claims are often smaller than the cost to go to court to get justice in those instances. So their problems go undressed most of the time. If you have to go to federal court and you can't go to small claims court, you're probably looking at a $25,000 to $50,000 legal bill minimum. So if your issue is less than that, you just take your lumps as a smallholder.
So people who haven't thought too clearly on this will wonder why. There used to be an idea that corporations would be right-wing. But they're not. They're absolutely not. And the reason they're not is it's good business, because every single regulatory obligation that gets pushed makes the fat ones fatter.
Because they can meet the cost of that where the smallholder cannot.
The marginal cost to them is lower than it is for you if you're running out of your garage.
In corporations, they say, corporations will be right-wing. They're not anything. They're not people, but we treat them as though they are. Belloc here makes some arguments against that too. The problem of using the court system is enormous, and the libertarians always gloss over this. Well, you can voluntary associations. You and I can operate under contracts that we voluntarily adhere to. And if there are any troubles, we don't have to have a legislation. We can go to either an arbitrator or a small claims court or another higher body if we need to. Okay, that's fine. Except that's not free. It's not free. Arbitration isn't free. Arbitration's expensive. I've done that. So for the small guy, even that solution just doesn't work. So he wants to make sure that to get around these problems where these big entities and the big men, he calls them, aggregate up all this property and all this power, corrupt the legislation, and have all the justice they can afford, which is all of it. He says that we need to restore the cultivator, the distributor, and the craftsman by creating an even distribution of property, as much so as we can anyway. And then we need to confirm these divisions of property by institutions that will protect that division of property. What the heck does that mean? How do you do that?
I don't know.
The government ought to have policies to help people own stuff and keep it.
Yes, but it's unlikely to do so. It's unlikely to do so because it's an oligarchy. Every senator is a millionaire, at least. Most of the House is as well. How'd they get that way? Well, for one, insider trading is not illegal for them. But somehow they go there and they get rich. Well, they're getting paid for something. They're getting paid by whom?
Not me.
The people whose interests they serve. You can be sure that a product is being made and getting paid for and delivered. Otherwise, the payment would not keep coming. So if that is the state of your legislature, he says all parliaments are oligarchies. They're all servants. They're all plutocracies. They're all servants of the rich. Where would you practically find a countervailing power in government to focus it towards the small? And communism, he says, I found really interesting that communism is just like a twin sister of capitalism. It's the same thing. It's the concentration of all the means of production, except in communism, supposedly everybody owns it.
Right.
Except you don't. The party owns it. It's just capitalism one step further.
Do you believe that? Do you buy that?
Well, reading Solzhenitsyn, I think, there were passages in those books about, like, if the trains don't run, they would execute you for being anti-revolutionary.
Mm.
It was a big business.
Mm-hmm.
And the people running it were just really, really far from you, and you weren't getting paid.
Instead of there being a top 5 businesses like I was talking about, there's the top 1 business.
The one, the Politburo.
I think that capitalism and communism are the same. They just see everybody as just a mouth to feed.
Well, not an economic unit, okay? So looking at the beginning, my little tiny bit of reading of Marx the other day, looking at the beginning of the Communist Manifesto, where everything is a history of class struggle, you're immediately reducing human experience to one element, to the economic element of class struggle, and judging everything on that basis. Well, you can, the same thing in economics now. I'm thinking to the Jaber Crow book where he talks about the economy and the war. The economy views me as an economic unit. Your starting premise is the same. Humans are merely economic units.
Yeah, I think we're both right. It sees them as economic units. So a unit of production, but also a cost to be born, too. You've got to be fed. You've got to be housed. How are we going to do that? Blah, blah, blah. Well, we're going to give you a wage, or we're going to give you UBI or whatever. So they look at you like, what can you produce? That's how you benefit society. What can you produce? The other one is how do we get your needs met so that you don't rise up and kill everyone? And that seems to be about it. He thinks that if we restore more people to these 3 different roles, he calls them the cultivator, the distributor, and the craftsman. So that would be, a farmer, of course. The distributor would be, well, a distributor, but also retailers, mom and pop shopkeepers. And of course, the craftsman, that makes sense. That's the plumber, that's the guildsman, the person that has a skilled trade. But all of these people would own whatever their tools were. And they would have many customers and not one. Everybody's in small business. But if you draw a wage, you have one customer. So he wants you to have more.
That's an interesting way to think about it.
I had a mentor who owned a machine shop when I was 15, 16, 17 years old. He's the one that pointed that out to me. He says, if you work for somebody, they tell you what your product is, and you have one customer. And if you own your own business, you have many, many customers, and you get to dictate what the product is and do it with integrity the way you need to do it. And of course, they can buy or not buy. And some of them won't, but not one of them, if you run your business properly, can give you the death sentence. And I've always liked that. Are there any of these kind of smallholder categories anymore? Like, he wrote this in 1936 where he's talking about the farmer, the distributor, the craftsman. Do we have any of those that we can, do you see it around?
Not so much, but which makes me kind of hopeful. I think the time is better now than it was then for a recovery, if only. This is, we've been complaining a little bit about our libertarian friends, and they're really friends.
They really are, yeah.
About impracticality.
Yeah.
Well, is distributism practical? I find I'm pretty sympathetic to it myself, but is it ever going to happen? Well, I think there's a better chance for it to happen on some degree now than there was for a couple of reasons. I am watching all around me. I've got an email I need to answer later today, a whole bunch of people taking charge of their kids' education because the public schools just aren't going to do it right now. I see a lot of people planting, even me,
Mm-hmm.
I got to figure out how to handle my cabbages. They're getting eaten. That's my first time around. I don't know what I'm doing. They're getting eaten and not by me, by critters. There's such a thing as a 3D printer now. Not too expensive. So making parts, not metal parts, but making, plastic parts is easier than it ever was. If you think about it the right way, you could make yourself a whole lot more independent and economically free now in an easier way than you could perhaps in 1936.
I think that's the best thing about this. Like, if you're a libertarian, the way that you act is to leave everybody alone, which means you get nothing done. But here, you could look at this and say, okay, these are all the things that I could do to be more economically free. How much of my food? Can I plant 3 tomato plants next year on my patio, whatever, on my fire escape, whatever? Can I find some other ways to get some income that I have more control over than just having my one wage from this one job? There are ways for us to move this forward a little bit. And whether you agree with distributism or not, how could you disagree with the idea that you should probably own more property when you can? And that property needs to directly contribute to your livelihood. No, I don't mean a lake house, right? We don't mean a bigger home. I don't mean pay your car off, although that might be part of it. We mean property for Belloc and for me is something that can directly contribute to your economic freedom. And economic freedom isn't just not being in a position to be canceled by the HR department. It's when there's a lockdown and the distribution system breaks and there's no beef or protein in the store, you have a way to get that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you panicked at the beginning of the year when you couldn't get bread, well, there you go. That shows you weren't very free.
Yeah.
Okay, if that was a point of discomfort for you, then maybe you ought to do something. And I'm not a good example at all, but I do have about 8 containers full of potatoes right now. So I'm making a start. I'm nearly 50 years old. I'm getting a late start on all of this stuff.
It's okay.
I'm old.
It seems to me like if you're on the left, particularly if you're kind of on the ecology left, this would be very, very appealing to you. And yes. I think if you're on the very, very far right, this would be very, very appealing to you. The boring moderates who are the problem in the country are going to buck up against this and say it can't be done. And what about my decent job and all that? Guys, you need to go look at this and look at this book and think about your life and think about, am I economically free? What are my strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And see if you can use some of these ideas here to mitigate some of those weaknesses and threats in your own economic life. There you go.
Yeah, well, I always thought the honest left and the honest right, if you go far enough, they meet
Sure.
out back behind the Chevron and shake hands.
Yeah, I like to have a sandwich with Emmett Penny.
Yeah.
He and I are where the horseshoe meets.
You're seeing some concerns. We're seeing the different concerns, but if you're honest and you're not in it just for power, what I mean by honest is you actually looking for the well-being of the human person. Well, there's a point of commonality, and you're probably going to meet somewhere. If you're just in it to push a party slogan and get power for your group, you're not honest and not much point in talking to you.
Before we keep pushing on in this book, I think he misses a few benefits of his system. Maybe I missed this in the quick read. He doesn't talk about how a distributist country would have so much more security from foreign control. 80%, I read recently that 80% of our medications in the United States aren't made here.
It's higher than that. The precursors to the medication, something like upwards of 90% is made in China.
Yeah. And so if they don't want you to have medicine, then we don't have medicine. I mean, you can imagine, just what if most things that we used or needed were created not just in the United States, but under his system, it would be within about 15 miles of you.
Yeah, I still can't get a freezer.
Right. I think a distributed system as pictured here or as laid out by Mr. Belloc would get rid of most of the business cycle. I think economic activity and the economic climate would be much milder and much flatter. It would be at the expense of growth,
sure,
rates of growth, but I don't care. Growth doesn't mean much to me. It means a lot to other people. And so, like McIntyre says, we really can't get together because we see different things as virtues. But I think this would be a much stabler system. If poorer, I don't mind being a little poorer.
What, you mean less Netflix?
Right. When I was a kid in the early 80s, late 70s, clothes were more expensive than they are now. Maybe in all respects. Certainly inflation adjusted, but maybe not even. People give me T-shirts all the time. I mean, T-shirts are basically free because people give them to me all the time. As a result, I have to throw them away every year because I don't wear them. Not because they're worn out or stained or tattered or anything, but because I have too many. Well, when I was a little kid, you'd have a couple pair of jeans, you have 3 or 4 shirts, you have 3 or 4 flannel shirts, you'd have 2 pairs of shoes, the old ones that you wore to play in, and then the new ones. And that was fine. I don't think we were any poorer. So a lot of our material wealth might decrease, but that'd be okay. And then he touches on this, but I would have liked for him to have hammered on this more, that under a distributive system, citizens would have more skin in the economic game than they do now. Right now, the only skin in the game they have is what's the unemployment rate and what's the unemployment benefit. If you get canned from your job, what's the unemployment benefit? That's basically it economically. Now, somebody out there saying, oh, but we have 401ks now, and we have... Listen, people don't... If you don't own anything, you don't care about property. If you don't own anything and you can't own anything, you're not going to care anything about property. You'll have no opinions about most tort. If you just go to work and punch a clock and come home, or you're a salaryman, a wage slave, the number of things that you care about versus a guy that owns 120 acres, 2 tractors, 4 kids, and fertilizer, and futures prices, and all this other, that guy's political concerns are enormously broader than somebody that's running the spreadsheet for Goldman Sachs down there on whatever hell street in New York City. Now, the person that works for Goldman Sachs thinks that they're politically savvy. They think that they have lots of political concerns. But the truth of it is, they pale in comparison to the person who actually has a small business, who goes and trades on his skills, his wits, and his own equipment every single day. And if you don't know that, it's because you've never done what I'm talking about.
I think I can sum that all up. If you don't really care about the weather, you're not economically involved.
Yeah. There's a little cafe on Main Street down here from me. And if you go in, they've got a big porch on the front of this cafe, and there's a wood stove out there. Guys gather up by that wood stove. Even in the summer, it's not burning. They throw cigarette butts in it when it's summer, and it's not burning. But in the winter, the wood stove's burning. They sit out there. They talk about the weather. Now, if you live in town, you talk about the weather. It's literally small talk. It doesn't matter. It's inconsequential. When they talk about the weather, it's, are we going to be able to get the hay in? And if I don't get the hay in, I'll have to feed this winter. I'm not going to make any money this year. They're all trying to figure out when they need to cut hay so they have the best time for it to dry, and so they don't have to ted it, which costs money and diesel fuel and so on, and bale it and get it in the barn or get it wrapped and get it put up before it gets wet. Like, it's a big, big deal. They have much higher stakes in everything. I have a friend who owned a plumbing business for 45 years, and his brother is a vice president at a giant company that you've heard of. It's actually his brother-in-law. And the brother-in-law is in charge of a multi-billion-dollar budget. No kidding. And they have enormous arguments at Thanksgiving because my friend says, you don't know what risk is. He says, oh, I'm in charge of this budget. And my friend says, oh, no, you don't understand. I'm a plumber. I have 7 employees. When I take a risk, it's with all of my net worth. You've never risked any of yours.
So somewhere in here, he talks about corporate personhood, corporations being able to own other corporations. He's against it because you get that sort of thing where you're going to make choices based on your perception of the good being the balance sheet, being the stock price, I guess, and not based on, well, what are my 7 employees going to eat? How are we going to... It's like, I'm always thinking of songs. If we make it through December, we'll be all right. Maybe we should make a Spotify playlist of every song we mention.
That would be a bad idea.
The OGB playlist. I want to talk about a claim, a rather shocking claim. I think this is in section 3.
Well, before we do that, do you think that a propertied class would be a more politically active and more politically savvy class.
Oh, yeah.
You think so?
For sure. It matters to them. This is I suppose it's a non-democratic idea, but property seems to have its own kind of rights, or at least its own interests, and people who own it will try to defend those interests. Do you care in your town about the water drainage? You probably don't. If you live in an apartment, if you live in a city that's paved over and has sewers and everything, you don't care about that stuff. So none of that is of interest to you because you don't have any property. If you own, 10 acres that you're hoping to have some of it growing things, you need to know where the water goes. The property has interests that you're going to pursue. And then, so say the county board gets together to decide on a water project, you'll probably go to the meeting.
Yeah. I know my county commissioner's name. I know where he lives.
I know mine, but I'd never get in to see her.
If we make it through December, it's one of my favorite songs, Carl.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah.
It's a Hamburg song.
He wants the government to take action to help people have property. And let's go through a list of these things he wants to do. He says that we need to tax large distributors differentially. So large distributors, he would say, so if you're a chain, he would tax you. So if you have multiple locations, he would raise your taxes based on how many locations. He doesn't want people to use their economy of scale to put mom and pops out of business all across the country.
Yeah, call that the Walmart tax.
Well, that one's not even the Walmart class. Let's call that one the McDonald tax. Because he has one where he would do differential taxation on multiple shops. He calls them multiple shops. That's a department store. You sell shoes, you sell food. It's Walmart. So he says under his plan, you could carry certain dry goods perhaps, and then a few ancillaries. But if you were in a certain number of product, more than a certain number of product classifications, you would have to pay a higher tax. And a lot of this sounds to libertarian, they're just going nuts right now. I knew a guy that was a pipe fitter, and in the pipe fitters union, and they would get pipe that would come from the distributor that was pre-threaded, and their union rules stated they had to thread everything. So they had to cut the threads off of the pipe and then rethread it. Well, that just drives a libertarian nuts. But what if you're just a 61-year-old widow lady and you run a dry goods store in Stigler, Oklahoma, and some asshole from Bentonville puts a Walmart in there and you're just out of business? What's she going to do?
You just need to go on the UBI and then go watch your streaming videos.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the problem. What does economic well-being look like to you? So to dig into the Greek, oikos means house. Okay? Economics is household management. Well, what makes a good managed household? Is it a household where you're in debt, where you are getting your universal basic income, where you are spending your days on distractions, following Cardi B or whoever the current celebrity is?
It's gross.
I think it's gross. What would a good household be? It's probably family. Maybe you talk to each other. Maybe you make music together like we used to.
Or maybe it's just work. It could also be work that deepens your understanding of the real world around you. Drainage, food, crafts, plumbing, whatever the heck that would be for you.
Yeah, and so if you have a different view of what economic well-being is, so there are economies of scale. Sure, if we need to build bombers, it's not going to be the mom-and-pop shop in Catoosa that's going to build the bomber. But economies of scale mean diseconomies of small scale.
Yeah.
So there is a cost to it. And the cost is that if you drive through, as we used to do quite regularly before quarantines and all of that, if you drive through all these small towns, those little charming storefronts that everyone wants to see in the Hallmark movie, they aren't there. They mostly aren't there. They've all been driven out of business. That's your cost. Your city is hollowed out like a donut.
In my example, big chain store or multiple shop, as he calls them, puts in a store, and now the lady that owns the dry goods store in Stigler, Oklahoma is out of business. Why is she out of business? Probably because her store is not as convenient, because not everything's in one place. It's not one-stop shopping. And probably her prices are higher.
Yep.
Well, what of the consumer? Are we going to ask the consumer to pay more just so that she can have a store?
See, you're getting this all wrong. Your money's not here. Your money's in his house. Your money's in, I'm quoting It's a Wonderful Life, right? When you pay Mrs. Smith to go shop at her dry goods store, you're paying so that there are Mrs. Smiths in your town.
Yeah, and so that your kid can have a job stacking cans or whatever for Mrs. Smith at some point. Or when you lose your job, you can say, I've always paid the bills. Can I pay you tomorrow for a hamburger today? So you have a damned community.
Yeah, that's the price. That's what you're paying for.
People are like, oh, the prices. This is one of the libertarian arguments that I've bought in on, by the way. Oh, the prices will go up. We already spend everything that we have anyway. Everybody already is living paycheck to paycheck virtually. Almost nobody has anything in savings. Nobody has anything paid for. And millions of people across the country have self-storage units. They have their excess in. The average size of houses is doubled almost in the last 50 years. The price doesn't matter because we just spend it anyway. Let's pay a little more so Miss Smith can have a job and we can have a community, and we just have less. Be nicer anyhow. Dang it.
Yeah, I don't know that you'd have less. You might have less stuff.
Yes, less stuff. He says that the state should differentially tax these larger entities. He says the state should foster discovery that disrupts monopoly in larger units. I don't know. He doesn't go into specifics on how you would do that. I'm not sure either. And I made a little note here, that technological innovation often destroys the capital of smallholders. So what do you do? I talk about this all the time. I think people get bored of it, but it's all I know. I ran a pretty big small business for about 20 years. It didn't start big, but we ended up pretty big as a small business. And we started that. I started that, and we actually ran a card catalog to do inventory control when we got started. Just like, think at the library. If you went to an auto parts warehouse 30 years or 50 years ago, how did they know how many Autolite spark plugs for a flathead Ford that they had in stock? They had a ledger, and they probably had a card catalog too that had the bin location in the warehouse, and it was all cross-referenced so they could find things and whatever. We did the same thing. Well, it got to the point that it became imperative in order for us to compete to throw the card catalog out, convert all that to something digital, and manage that in some sort of a database. And then we bought a specialized inventory control system, and then we replaced it when that company was absorbed by another. I had a card catalog that let us find everything that we needed and know how to bill our clients and do what we needed to do. We had a Cardex system that worked, and it was paid for decades ago. Technology, barcode scanners, et cetera, meant that I ended up replacing that about 3 times. The original Cardex system probably cost about $3,500. Before it was over, I could go look. We probably ended up spending about $3 million in total to continually replace that Cardex system that worked to begin with.
Did it work better? Did you know more of where your stuff was?
We didn't know more, but we knew more in real time. It instilled confidence in our customers to know that we used barcode tracking systems just like those of FedEx and other companies, and we were able to do more with less people. I could justify spending all the money that I spent on those inventory control systems and those distribution control systems. I could justify it. I didn't just do it for sport. We spent all that money because we could justify it. But it's highly disruptive, and there were competitors here in my region that disappeared. I bought some of them when they became distressed because they could not do what we did. And ultimately, I ended up selling my business because I could see that it was going to be difficult for me to stay abreast of those sorts of innovations as well. So, what do you do about technology if you want people to own property? What do you do?
Yeah, technology is a disruptive influence for sure. And I don't think we've figured it out yet.
Mm-mm.
How old is technology? I mean, technology is really old, but the explosion of it, what is it, 200 years old?
Maybe. Good enough.
Okay. When did the steam engine come out?
1750s.
I don't know. Someone will know.
Okay, let's look up Watt's steam engine. Talk on while I research.
Well, it hasn't been very long, and so we've had a whole lot of innovation in mastery of nature, and we haven't yet developed the virtues to deal with a lot of these things adequately. Like an example, the cell phone. Okay? The cell phone is a very disruptive thing that we all have, and nobody knows how to manage it. The thing runs your life. You're always looking at it. You go to dinner with your friends, if you're in a place where you can go to dinner with your friends, and what does everybody do? At some point, they're all looking at their phones. We do not have, what would the Aristotelian virtue of phone be?
A phone?
I don't know. You have temperance.
Moderation.
Is the mean between, insensibility and overindulgence, something like that. So we haven't figured out the mean for how much to pay attention to your phone. Nobody knows how to do it, and we give them to our kids, and they don't have any virtue either, and so they're stuck on it.
We don't even know what it is, because it's actually not even a phone. Like, we don't even know what the damn thing is. Like, how much attention do you give any object?
I hardly ever make calls. You're the only one who ever calls me.
I know. I can tell when I call. You're just bewildered.
It's like, oh, it takes calls, too.
Right. And nobody even knows what the damn thing is, Is it a mind control device? Is it a television? Is it a radio? Is it...
But you got to have one.
Yeah, nobody even knows what it is.
So compare it maybe to the book. Mm-hmm. Speaking of Canticle for Leibowitz. The book is old technology. We kind of know how to deal with that. We know how to manage it. We put them on shelves. We don't usually read them while we're walking. We have ways to take notes. We have all sorts of things attached to the book, to the codex, which is the kind of book that we have, not a scroll, but a codex. But we don't have that for the phone yet. Nope. The thing is, if you had what I would consider an intact culture, an intact, vigorous culture, when you got the new thing, you wouldn't instantly go do the new thing. You would say, should we do the new thing? Right. And you might adopt it slowly and say, is this really worthwhile? And then if it wasn't, you'd say, you know what? No, thank you, Nokia or whoever makes phones these days. No, thank you, Apple. I don't want one.
But I have to have one for my work, Carl.
Do you really?
Well, that's not an economically free person wouldn't have to.
Yeah, if you need it so that your boss can text you on a Sunday morning and get an answer from you by Sunday afternoon, you're not very free.
I really worry about this whole work from home movement under COVID. It's just going to be work all day, every day.
Well, the bright side would be that you don't necessarily need to live in these urban centers anymore. And maybe propertarianism, maybe the time is as ripe as it's ever going to be for it. We're not being systematic on this book, but
no.
I want to talk about the king. Can I talk about the king?
I love to talk about kings because...
You want one?
I want one. I want the Habsburgs back.
This is, I think it's in chapter 3. This is heading number 6. The effect of plutocracy in corrupting the legislative machine needs in theory no demonstration. For we all know nowadays that such corruption is ubiquitous. That means everywhere. And nowhere does it work with greater force than under a parliamentary system. You have a Congress or Parliament. Well, to have effect, there is no necessity for actually handing over shares or money to the politicians. For even when such direct action of plutocracy on the legislative machine is not exercised, there is indirect pressure of all kinds. So you got your people in Congress. They have all sorts of pressure to vote certain ways to protect their friends who have in some ways enriched them or maybe given them direct cash payments, but certainly invite them to the cool parties in the Hamptons. So you got to do what they want. And I loved what he said about the king. I hadn't thought about it this way. The evil is less formidable under active monarchy than under any other form of government. For the whole point of absolute monarchy is that the monarch is too wealthy to be bullied.
Of course.
But democracy.
Yeah. So I've done some D-Lives about, more and more I'm becoming a monarchist. And there are a lot of reasons why. Chief among them is that the monarch will have a property right in the well-being of the country. He wants his citizens and the country to do well because he's going to pass that on to his kids and his grandchildren and his progeny at some point, his posterity at some point. So he has a longer-term view than your parliamentarian would. There are fewer people to kill if you need to clean everything up. I sure do like that. And then this is the thing that my libertarian friends, Hockley, get irritated about. Having a monarchy doesn't mean big government. You're more likely to have a libertarian government under a monarch that has to pay for all the functions of government out of his own pocket and his own revenues than this weird faceless state that we end up with in these other systems. So there.
Yeah, that was an interesting thought, that the richness of the king is to your benefit.
Yes.
The richness of the Congress is not to your benefit.
He has a profit motive in doing a good job, so you want him to get rich.
Yeah, whereas the Congress has a profit motive in screwing you over.
And getting little kids, too. They like that.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Yeah, he says a strong monarchy is there to safeguard the freedom of the small man against the tyranny of the great. And I think that that's true. And there are bad monarchies. Clearly. Clearly. There are terrible monarchs. You've got lazy ones. Those are pretty good. You've got despots. You got some of them. We put the bad on the end of their name. King John, the bad. But there's so many fewer people to kill or to jail or to exile when you need to clean up the government.
Well, and it has been a much more stable form of government. Monarchies have lasted a whole lot longer than democracies, which tend not to.
But economic mobility under the Bellocian plan here and in the monarchies is much flatter, slower, less likely. Is that okay?
It depends what you think the good life is. No, it doesn't depend what you think the good life is. It depends what the good life is.
Aha.
What is the good life? I think that's where all of our problems come in. Mm-hmm. Back in the beginning of the Nicomachean Ethics, what is happiness? That's the question that nobody talks about, or give what I think's the wrong answer, which is it's whatever you want it to be. And any concern in politics, that's why the politics comes second to the Nicomachean Ethics. You have to figure out what happiness is, and then you do the politics to figure out what ways can we achieve this end. And sometimes you say no to things, whereas you have no rational basis for saying no to anything where it's just happiness is whatever I want.
Yeah. Liberty and or freedom isn't license. What is the good life? So the American dream, Karl. What's the American dream? What was it? Let's talk about it in past tense. What was the American dream, Karl?
Owning your own house?
Owning your own house, maybe. I was thinking to do better than one's parents. I've often heard that.
Yeah.
Better, whatever.
Yeah, I think I heard it in music the other day, what it should have been. I was listening to another guy whose name I'm never quite sure how to pronounce, Dvorak's New World Symphony. The Largo from that. So what he did a tour of the United States. And this famous European composer, sympathetic to us. And he didn't stay in New York. He went, it was either Kansas or Nebraska. He stayed somewhere in a small town in the middle of the country during the whole farm season. And you can hear it in the Largo. To me, it's very evocative. It's like the good life. I'm with my family. We're talking. We're doing beautiful things. I don't know. I can't express it except musically.
Yeah. You're participating in the necessities of life together, which would include food, shelter, games.
Yeah. But then, oh no, I got to do more. I got to be more. That's Alcibiades. That's I have to go grab more what and for why.
Yeah.
In a previous podcast, you were angry at a Reba McEntire song about her dissatisfaction and how she's got to leave. Well, if you're dissatisfied, that's the problem. The problem isn't that you don't have enough, usually. The problem is that you think enough isn't enough.
Are you going to make me play that song again?
I'm not going to make you do anything. We're all about liberty.
Right? Is that license? I can just do whatever I want and get naked right now?
I can look away.
Okay. Who was the composer?
Dvorak.
Yeah. He doesn't go to New York City. He goes elsewhere. All big cities are essentially alike. They are. They really are.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to a bunch of them on some different continents, and they're all the same. Sometimes the smell's a little different. Some of them smell more like curry, and some of them smell more like garlic, and some of them, like New Orleans, smell like hot trash and flowers. The French Quarter in New Orleans smells like hot trash and flowers.
I think that's right. I spent about 28 hours there. I don't remember, but 3 of them.
Yeah, that's it. When you get away from that is when there's when things are actually regional, and this would be a much less urban world if Belloc's plan came together. That steam engine, he developed it sporadically between 1763 to 1775, the Watt double-acting steam engine.
So that's 250 years.
Yeah.
That's nothing.
It really isn't. Communist haters out there. Is it better to have everything owned by the state or a few individuals?
Well, but the state would be accountable to us.
Uh-oh. Are you a commie?
No, I'm not, because I don't think the state would be accountable. In practice, it has not been.
I didn't phrase that correctly. Let me go back up here. Is it better to have things owned by the state or by people?
People.
Okay. Is it better to have everything owned by the state or 1 million people?
1 million people?
100,000 people or the state?
100,000?
400 people or the state?
See, the thing is, you're going to keep going down, and it's going to become identical.
Right.
At some point, that 400 people might as well be the state.
I mean, well, what is the state? How many people is the state? How many people are in the House? How many people are in the Senate? How many people are in the executive branch? There's so many on the Supreme Court. It doesn't even matter how many on the Supreme Court because who knows what they're going to do. Like, we're pretty close there. You can go look at like the Fortune 500 or the S&P 500 or whatever. And don't look down your street and look at the houses on both sides of Maple Lane there and think those people own that stuff, because they don't, guys. You know that. Who owns everything?
Not most people.
Not most people.
I think it'd probably be better to rent than to have a mortgage.
Could be.
Unless it's something that you can absolutely manage to pay off in a short period of time.
Well, let's talk about that. Belloc says rent is illegal in his country, his hypothetical country, in his republic, unless it's convertible to a deed. I've heard around here we'll talk about a contract for deed. You can tell somebody, pay me something down, and then your payment's this much a month. And as long as you make all your payments, at the end of the period, the house is yours. If you miss some of your payments, there's this penalty. And if you go delinquent enough, it all converts to rent and I get to evict you. But at least the renter has, under a contract for deed, the renter has an opportunity to eventually own their house. And not only do they have an opportunity to eventually own it, it prevents people from just aggregating up property and making a living off of rents. It used to be that we had that dirty phrase, and libertarians still use it, rent seeking. We're trying to avoid that. So it's become a term of art that economists use for people that are using the system to gain incomes without providing a useful service or product. But Belloc really wants people to not make a living off rents because it allows them to obtain scale and then aggregate up more property and eventually become plutocratic, and et cetera.
My reason for saying rent is probably better than mortgage is just because your risk is lower.
Your risk is lower.
I think ownership would be better than renting, but renting would be better than a 30-year mortgage that you're on the hook for, which you're not likely to ever pay off. I think that contract for deed sounds like a good idea. because you don't have the risk. If you can't make the payments, well, you just leave, and it was all rent.
Yep. At one point, I had quite a bit of rental property, and I had some long-time renters. I sold it all in 2015, and I had some long-term renters that we actually struck contracts for deed with them because I didn't want them. I didn't know how they're going to get treated when we sold out, and they were good folk, and they'd been there a while, and we did contracts for deed, and all of them executed, and we did quitclaim deeds, and they've got houses now. I think it's a good thing. He's going to prohibit usury too. Your bank cannot make money lending at interest. If you need to borrow, you're going to have to go to your guild or a cooperative lending institution. So I was thinking about all of this and thinking about how here in Oklahoma, I don't know what it's like anywhere in doing business in any other state, but here in Oklahoma, we've got credit unions. That's ostensibly what they're supposed to be, is a lending cooperative, and they've kind of gotten away from their missions in a lot of ways. We certainly have usury, but we have tiered property tax system, Carl. I don't know if you have this in Illinois, but here you can file homestead exemption. You can say, this is the house I live in, and you can declare that for one property, and the property that you declare homestead exemption on pays a much lower property tax rate than rental properties or commercial property. So we have a little touch of that distributism here in Oklahoma, and I've seen some other examples as I read this book that we have here. It's pretty cool. Property that's an agricultural purpose here in Oklahoma, we pay a lower property tax as well if you have an agriculture exemption on it, which is good. I didn't used to think so.
I'm not aware of that in Illinois.
The libertarian piece of me used to get mad. Well, it's not the free market. Yeah, who cares? I don't care anymore.
Yeah, so if you promote free market as like your guiding star, you need to make a strong connection between that and human happiness.
Right.
Don't say productivity or efficiency, because then I'm just going to ask the question again, how do productivity and efficiency help human happiness?
The graphs of GDP and infant mortality are directly opposed, so they have to be... No. You have to actually connect the dots, and don't say there's a correlation between industrialization and infant mortality. Maybe the kinds of people that industrialize figure out how to deal with that. Maybe they're not related.
Well,
we don't know.
What was the mortality of the kids dragging coal through the mines?
Right.
To feed the Industrial Revolution and the free market. I'm not a communist, really.
Yeah,
No, I'm not.
Are you a distributist?
Maybe. I don't know. Ask me again next week.
So you said something about the buggy whip people, manufacturers. So there's this idea we have this creative destruction, and the buggy whip manufacturers get put out of business by Henry Ford's Model T, and then they go retrain and they go do something else. But guys, that's not what's happened. Unemployment has gone up since the 1830s. It used to be every single person was hands on deck. That's what child labor was about. It wasn't exploitative. They had to do it so people wouldn't starve to death and die because they were disenfranchised from their property. We could talk about that. But you didn't have child labor in Kansas where there was the Homestead Act and people could get land. They might work for their parents on the farm, but you didn't have sweatshops where there was property in the United States. You're going to see sweatshops in highly industrialized places where property has been alienated from regular people. So as this industrialization has happened, more and more people have been taken out of the workforce, which in the beginning looks good. Okay, now the kids aren't working at the quote-unquote sweatshop. Sweatshop's another word for factory, by the way. And then later on, the buggy whip manufacturers, and then later on, some other class of people, and so on. So if you look now at the United States, you're going to have to dig really hard and probably get your calculator out to figure this out. There are only about 40% of the people in the United States are working now. Despite what Gene Roddenberry thinks, when we don't have to work, we don't just pursue science for science sake and art for art's sake or become explorers because it tickles our fancy and push the button in the wall and get turkey dinners out of the hole in the wall like they do in the Enterprise. That's not how it works. It dehumanizes and demoralizes the person. Industrialization has taken wholesome work away from most of the people in the country. And if you don't agree with me, I'm sorry. Maybe it's a good thing that a certain measure of industrialization eventually took children out of the dangerous workplace. Maybe that's a good thing. But where does it stop? When we have one guy pushing the button that makes food for everybody and nobody else works? Like, where does it stop? Is work good for us?
Well, what are you using all your leisure for?
Right.
Are you contemplating the good?
Or did they legalize weed?
Or are you binging on Netflix and Tiger King and all of that stuff that people do? What is the shape of the good life? That's the big question. It's not idleness. Leisure is not idleness. Properly spent leisure is not idleness. Properly spent leisure is creative and hard work. It's probably harder work than your job.
Yeah. You know, the good folks, that retire that say, I'm busier now than I was when I was working. Yeah. That's what it means. On page 62, there are a few things in here I wanted to just read out loud. He says that the property owner, while he doesn't have much cash, has several advantages. He has two advantages over the regularly paid labor of the town. One, freedom, that is a sustenance under his own control, and quality, that is a sustenance better in every way, in material, in hours, in choice, in locale. The peasant eats not only of his own product, but off his own table and at his own hours, and he eats better food and brews better drink. Yeah, food's pretty weird.
I had McDonald's burgers yesterday.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. What are those?
I don't know. Kangaroo meat.
Yeah.
It was salty, though, so.
Right. All in all, the Bellocian property owner, he says, lives of your own. Your own work, your own effort, your own property, your own food, your own table. And there are probably people that are saying, well, there's too many people and we can't do that. He says we're not seeking a mechanical perfection in this. We just need more people to do that. Maybe we can't have all of them do that. Maybe we do need stealth bombers and we have to do some things, to get those things to come about. Maybe we do. But we should always delegate as many tasks as we can to the smallest entity that can do them.
So the argument for that is that you have a different quality of a country when you have more people that are property owners versus fewer. That part in the beginning, the criticism that he talked about in the preface, they might be slower to act and less quick to go to war and all of that, where I said, feature or bug.
Yeah.
You think about the society of people you'd want to be associated with, okay? If you are, let's say you just got out of college, okay? Your friends are a bunch of rootless cosmopolitan people, like we all were, or most of us were, except for Scott. And they're not interested in getting married. They're not interested in settling down. All they want to do is smoke medical marijuana and, I don't know. Or a group of people that owned stuff, built stuff, were productive. Which group of people are better friends to you? Of which group would you rather be a part? Which one is more susceptible to being co-opted and dominated by an external force? So, rootless fun post-college, yeah, but you can't stay that way. You don't want to stay that way. You don't want most of your people to be like that. Maybe some of them, I don't know, the musicians, but you want to have stable people. And how do you get that kind of stability? Belloc would say it's with property.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of, he also says the beer would be better.
He's right.
We know that for a fact when whatever the laws were that limited microbreweries, when those were let up a little bit, you had better beer.
Yeah, I made some notes in here. I asked you earlier, are we seeing any of this now? And you gave some examples, and I didn't give any of mine. There is an artisanal movement among the hipsters,
Hipsters are not your enemy.
No, they're not. Yeah, the whole microbrewery movement is really about that. Now, we look at it through a modern American lens, which is say, oh, we have more choice and the quality's going up and the consumer benefits. Well, yeah, that's true. But there are also a bunch of people that get to work for a microbrewery instead of Anheuser-Busch or whatever. And that's a pretty darn good thing. And the more of the market that's aggregated among all those microbreweries is going to be stabler and to the benefit of more people.
You and I toured that distillery in the Ozarks.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
It's a guy and his wife. Named Ozark Distillery, by the way. Brilliant marketing.
I forgot the name. I'm sorry. We just ran out of the butterscotch stuff.
Yeah, they make good whiskey. It's a new business, a new distillery, so the
vodka was excellent.
You can't make 17-year-old bourbon if you're in your third year. So a lot of their stuff's young, but they make some good liqueurs.
Apparently, you can do vodka wrong and you can do vodka right, and he explained it to us. And the vodka was really good.
Karl, he says, you cannot start a new peasantry save at the expense of the diseased society surrounding it. And if you're not prepared to impose that sacrifice, your peasantry will never be established. You're going to have to hurt big business.
Yes.
You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to hurt the upper class and the upper middle class probably to do it. Now, you're not going to hurt them with a gun or a pitchfork, but their taxes are probably going to go up, and it's going to be harder for them to have a second home. It's going to be harder for Ted Turner to be the largest private landowner in the country.
Is he?
I think that's right. I'm going to look it up. All right. Karl's fact-checking me.
I am not fact-checking you. Whatever. It's fine. No, the federal government's the largest landowner.
No, I think he's one of the largest private landowners.
Look at a map of Arizona sometime that has all the federal land marked out on it.
Oh, yeah.
There's very little of Arizona that's not the feds.
Ted Turner owns 2 million acres, and he's number 2. A guy named John Malone owns a telecom monster, owns 2.2 million. He's number 1. The King Ranch is number 10, 911,000. I don't begrudge those people that. I don't have any resentment here. I don't want to take anything from them at all. I actually don't. I wish they could have all the things that they want to have. If it takes 2 million acres to throw in the hole in his soul to fill it up, that's fine. But I do wish that more people had what they needed in order to get what they need. I don't want to hand them anything, right? This is teach a man to fish, not just give him the fish, right?
Have you heard the Terry Pratchett quote? You probably have, because I've given it to you. You build a man a fire and he's warm for an hour or two. If you light him on fire, he's warm for the rest of his life.
Right. I like it. Are you a distributist now, Karl?
Like I said, I don't know. Today I am. Ask me in a week. What are the alternatives? If your goal is the actual flourishing of human beings, I think you can't help but see that something's wrong.
Yeah.
People think they're happy, but suicide rates are way up. Addictions are way up. Happiness is way down by any way that we can measure it. But the stock market's up.
Stock market's up. And I keep getting in these arguments with like family and people on the internet. They're like, oh boy, they want to turn this into a socialist country. It already is, you know?
Yeah.
It already is. I actually told my dad this. He got a little bit irritated. That if you have an income under a certain level, you get a UBI, universal basic income. You get it in the form of like a Section 8 housing benefits. You get it in the form of they call it EBT now. It used to be food stamps. Also, it can just get straight up cash money. If you're handicapped in some way, you can get that SSI disability. If you're over a certain age, you get Social Security. If you're over a certain age, we have single-payer health care, essentially, with Medicare. If you're impoverished, you'll get Medicaid, which is single-payer health for poor people. So, if you're old enough or poor enough, it's full-blown socialist country. It's the people in the middle that should be slowly aggregating property that get none of those things. Ted Turner's fine. The situation's set up such that it works for him, and he can get 2.2 million acres. And again, I don't begrudge him. I don't have any resentment about it. I do have resentments about how hard it is to slowly and carefully accumulate property and capital for people that are in that middle, who don't have the economies of scale, who experience a greater hardship to save $5,000 a year than the person who makes $1 million, et cetera. And it seems to me like it would only be reasonable, even in a libertarian society, to make it easier for most of the people in the country to own their own means to produce what they need. Not earn it, not earn a wage, but to actually have the means to produce the things they need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you care how much the dollar's worth or what the Fed's doing if you only use money to buy shoes and pay property tax? And you only do that because you can't make shoes?
I would hope I wouldn't.
Not so
I
much.
don't think it's healthy to care.
Did you see him talk about how bad mass-produced shoes were? Did you see that?
Yeah. Probably had shoes that pinched.
They're terrible. Well, we could buy these real, like, ultra cushy athletic shoes that last you about 9 months. You pay $89 to $190 for them, and you throw them away.
Mm-hmm.
They're terrible. They're cushy for a little while, and they're just like sloppy inside. They get worn out inside because they're so cushy your foot moves around in the shoe.
Well, you know the kind of shoes I wear.
Karl has these shoes that are like a neoprene membrane with like a zip tie on it. And the zip tie goes around his big toe. It's not a zip tie. It has a zip tie that goes around his big toe, and then he walks on this neoprene film.
I wear hippie shoes.
Just to keep from getting hookworms. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to wear a shoe. I don't want a foot coffin.
I had a pair of work boots made about 2 years ago. They were expensive. They were $500.
Mm-hmm.
That's really not that expensive if you think about how much everything else is. And the fact that they don't last very long.
Well, if they're of the quality that you can resole them.
They are. Yeah, these are going to last 15 years or so, at least. Well, they came to me, they measured my foot, and I came in, and I put them on, and it was like shoving my foot in a wooden box. I was like, oh no, what have I done? They were so uncomfortable. I could barely get my foot in them. And then the guy says, wear it 1 hour today, 2 hours the next day, blah, 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 blah. And once you've worn them a total of 40 hours, you'll probably be good to wear them all day one day. A full work day. And by the time I did that, it was the most comfortable shoe I've ever had in my life. But I realized because of the nature of leather and because of how they have to manufacture shoes, there is no way that you could take a properly made work boot, and let people try them on in a store to determine if they wanted to buy it. Because the thing absolutely felt like a torture device when I first put my foot in it.
So you have to have the final cause in mind.
And to trust the tradesman that the shoe is going to work out. Yeah, they're wonderful. I've got cushy, fancy running shoes that the little running store measured my foot and put me in. I've got all that crap that you would expect anybody to have. I had I don't wear Red Wing boots anymore, which are supposedly like the best, because these are the most comfortable shoe I've ever had in my life. I really don't want to wear anything else. So sometimes I wear them to like the grocery store, and I've got shorts on and like these big clunky boots. Charity's embarrassed, but I feel good.
I need to get you a pair of those sandals.
I can't do that.
Have your toes out.
Yeah, I don't think I can.
Are you opposed to toes?
A little bit.
Yeah.
But a guy named Nick made those boots. I paid him what they're worth, and I got an exemplary product that you can't even get it at a store. Walmart, nobody.
Well, how do you go buy shoes from Nick if you're talking about him?
Nick's, you just go buy Nick's boots, man. Let me go to this website here. Listen. nicksboots.com.
There you go. Is it he in Tulsa?
Nope. They got a website there. Show you how to measure your foot. Send that thing in there in Spokane, Washington. And he'll make you a boot. And you get your checkbook, man. It's expensive. It's expensive. But cost per wear, I bet it's 10% of what it is for your cheapest shoe.
We have received no promotional considerations from Nick's Boots. This is unsolicited praise.
Yeah, so good. By the way, you ever heard of the Pioneer Woman? Got a cooking show, does these cookbooks and stuff. She's from Oklahoma.
I think so. You might have talked about her.
Her name's Ree Drummond. She's got like a Food Network TV show, and she writes these books and stuff. Neat lady. She's married to Ladd Drummond, 23rd largest landholder in the country. 433 acres of land here in Oklahoma, the Drummond Land and Cattle Company.
433 makes you that high on the list?
433,000, yeah, number 23.
Oh, 433,000.
Yes. And the Drummonds have been here for a long time. Seem like nice people. Don't know them. Seem like nice people. Gettner Drummond is an attorney here in town. He may be a judge now. They've got a lot of political influence, and they own Pawhuska, Oklahoma. They can do whatever the hell they want up there. And again, I don't begrudge them that, but the way things are set up, the more you have, the more you can have. And Belloc is not, he's not okay with that. And I don't see anything too wrong with that. Is this utilitarian?
No. There's no thought that pleasure is the greatest good.
Is that one of the requisites for the, like Bentham and those guys?
Yeah. The only way you measure the good is pleasure. Some of them even have units. How many Benthams? I don't think it holds together. I was thinking we probably ought to read some John Stuart Mill at some point.
Yeah.
Like the On Liberty would be an interesting book to tackle. I think utilitarianism has got great big flaws in it. I'd just be waiting to hit him over the head with his mistakes if we did that one.
Yeah. Yeah, so next week we're going to be covering Herbert Marcuse. Is it not Marcuse?
I don't know. Isn't it French?
Yeah.
On principle, I don't pronounce French correctly.
Okay. Herbert Marcuse, Repressive Tolerance.
There we go.
We're going to read that essay. That'll be just a laugh a minute. And then maybe we'll read a little John Stuart Mill. That might be good. What else, Carl? You have anything else to tell these people? Other than enrollment is open and they can go to onlinegreatbooks.com/OGB podcast, or you can even go to onlinegreatbooks.com/podcast. Yeah, I think both of those work. And sign up to read some of these books with us. No, by the way, I don't think we've covered anything on this show that is in our program.
Nick and McKean Ethics.
We covered
a long time ago, and Pride and Prejudice is probably on the back end.
Yeah, it should probably be on there. But we got this thing there at Online Great Books where we tell people we don't want them to go to secondary sources until they've read the material. We want them to hit it themselves and give it their best shot clean without somebody else poisoning their idea of what the text is about or what it should be. So as a result, we've avoided talking about the things that we read in our program because we didn't want to color anybody's experience of it. Yeah,
and can I tell you, I don't. This might be our most political show because Scott and we're probably distributists. At least today we are.
Yeah.
I don't care when I'm running a seminar. I don't care what you think at the end. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I really try not to do that. We had a C.S. Lewis thing. He's not on our list, but we were doing a gateway session, Abolition of Man, and I spent 3/4 of that seminar arguing against him.
Yeah.
The point is the thinking, and then you walk out of it and you say, well, I wasn't convinced by the arguments. I'm going to go read Anarchy, State, and Utopia and try to refute Belloc. Great, fantastic, because you're thinking it, you'll own it. We need more people who are actually thinking about stuff. And if you disagree, that's fine. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Over here at the show, I'm trying to do some infotainment. And it's a much different situation than seminar is. Seminar, we're just we're trying to ask the good questions. We're trying to make people clarify their thoughts and to think about the other thing, whatever that might be. Yeah, I've done Iliad seminars where I have to act like it's a terrible book and tell them why it's trite and gross and stuff.
I lie all the time.
Yeah. That's a sign of a good seminar leader.
Why am I so good at it? Lying, I mean.
Because you care. We lie because we care. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. I want you to please go to onlinegreatbooks.com and sign up for our program there. If you sign up, we'll know that you're listening to the show and that the show's working. We're not just doing this for sport, although we like doing it. We're doing it to try to get more people to join us in our program. And if you can't do that, but you still think the show's worth it, please send it on to somebody else and help us bring some more people to our listenership. That would be a big help to us. I'm proud of this, and I would like for more and more people to listen. I'd like to make some more libertarians mad, so send it to one of those guys and see if I can twist their tail a little bit. And get your Marcuse out. It's not very long. It's about 18 pages or something like that. Repressive Tolerance, we'll read that. And be talking about it next Thursday. Thank you guys so much for listening.